Coming up tonight on YCN News, seniors from 3 area high schools will graduate tonight. Republican and travel agency owner Scott Milne challenges Vermont Governor Peter Shumlin for the elected position. Food industry trade groups file suit against Vermont for the GMO labeling law. For more news, weather, and sports, it's time for YCN, your local view.
Now, your daily digest of the Dartmouth Lake Sunapee region, southern Vermont, and Windsor County. News, sports, weather, and all that is happening in our area. The news on YCN, your local view.
Good evening, and welcome to this Friday edition of YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. Hats off to seniors graduating tonight from 3 area high schools. These include New Hampshire's Hanover and Claremont 12th graders and their counterparts from Hartford High School in White River Junction, Vermont. 882 students will don cap and gowns at Hanover High School for a 6 p.m. ceremony, school officials note. Valedictorian is Camille Henkel. Guest speaker is high school social studies teacher Matt Prince. The weather, rainy today, will determine whether the ceremony is held inside or outside at Merriman Branch Memorial Field. Further north in the Upper Valley, 149 diplomas will be awarded to graduates of Hartford High School in a 7 p.m. ceremony. Emma Healy is valedictorian. Evan Brown is salutatorian. And at the Claremont Opera House, 87 students will graduate from Stevens High School. Ongoing renovations at the school are the reason for the Opera House location, which the senior class chose instead of an outdoor ceremony. This year, 2 students tied for valedictorian honors. The co-valedictorians are Cassandra Dale and Jenna Deshane. The ceremony begins at 6 p.m., followed by a post-graduation party beginning at 10 p.m. at the new community center on South Street. Another candidate has come forward to challenge U.S. Representative Ann McLean Custer. Republican Jim Lawrence of Hudson filed necessary paperwork at the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office on Wednesday, reports the Concord Monitor. Lawrence says his campaign will be based on ideas and issues and not the color of his skin. Lawrence is of African American heritage. His filing for the U.S. congressional race makes him the first black man to do so, the newspaper reports. Lawrence notes another minority candidate who also is running for the seat held by Custer. Republican Mayor Linda Garcia from Salem declared her intent to run earlier this year. The race for governor is shaping up in Vermont. Democrat Peter Shumlin will be challenged for the state's top elected office by Republican and travel agency owner Scott Milne. Milne tells Vermont Public Radio that property tax and school and health care funding issues need to be addressed. Now that Vermont's proactive law to require GMO labeling is underway, the food industry is reacting with strong opposition. Vermont Public Radio reported today that the food industry trade groups filed suit against Vermont yesterday in federal court. Their argument is that the Vermont law goes against the Constitution. VPR's report includes a statement from the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which says, Vermont's mandatory GMO labeling law, Act 120, is a costly and misguided measure that will set the nation on a path toward a 50-state patchwork of GMO labeling policies that do nothing to advance the health and safety of consumers. The Snack Food Association, the International Dairy Foods Association, and the National Association of Manufacturers joined the Grocery Manufacturers Association in the lawsuit that goes on for 21 pages. Their complaints, VPR reported, are that the law is unconstitutional on more than one count. They believe the law could restrict trade amongst states as well as illegally regulate commercial speech. The document states that will affect, by Vermont's count, 8 out of 10 foods at the grocery store. Yet Vermont has effectively conceded that this law has no basis in health, safety, or science. That is why a number of product categories, including milk, meat, restaurant items, and alcohol, are exempt from the law. This means that many foods containing GMO ingredients will not actually disclose that fact. VPR goes on to report that their complaint also states that the Food and Drug Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency have found GMOs safe. Vermont's Attorney General's office was not surprised by this legal challenge, and the state has already prepared a legal defense fund to defend the GMO labeling law. Also in Vermont news, Congressman Peter Welch is calling for more affordable and safe housing throughout the nation. Welch chose Burlington, Vermont today to highlight his work on House Bill 4717. The bill is focused across the country and would improve the federal low-income housing tax credit. And as he noted in Burlington today, the bill would stimulate the development and fixing up of rental housing in that northern Vermont city. Welch and Burlington Mayor Miro Weinberger met with other residents supporting the bill, including Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, Sarah Carpenter. The credit program began in 1988. It needs updating, says Welch, especially in Burlington, home to the University of Vermont. Apartment rentals can be scarce and too expensive for working Vermonters. Tax credits offered last year through the program paved the way for $23 million in affordable housing financing via public-private partnerships. Since 1988 in Vermont, 5,800 affordably priced apartments have been built, also creating 6,700 jobs for the people involved in construction. Welcome back to YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. YCN's John O'Connor brings us this next story from Wilmot, New Hampshire. Michael Togus, a well-established speaker and nonfiction author, talks with John about his adventurous work from his newest book, a father-daughter collection called The Cringe Chronicles, to another of his works entitled Overboard, which follows a story of disaster and survival.
Joining me at the Wilmot Public Library on Thursday is author Michael Togus. And thanks for coming to Wilmot. That's the first thing I want to say. We're here just before the talk begins with a chance to talk about your books. What's your newest book?
The latest book is a book I did with my daughter titled The Cringe Chronicles, and the subtitle says it all, Mortifying Misadventures with My Dad.
All right, so how did this work that you and your daughter wrote a book together?
Well, Kristen writes each chapter, and it's about her teenage years growing up with an eccentric father, moi, and at the end of each chapter, I get my say in a little section called A Dad's View. And oftentimes my perspective on the same event that she's describing is very different. So in a way, it's a rebuttal to the events she's blaming on me. And it's just a fun, lighthearted book. It's probably what a lot of teenagers think about their parents. And although Kristen is 25 now, an accomplished writer, the book takes place in her teenage years.
So it's probably a must-read for all parents out there who have or are going to have teenagers.
Parents will enjoy it. Teenagers obviously enjoy it. But surprisingly, Kristen's been telling me she's hearing from a lot of people in their 20s and 30s that aren't so far removed from those teenage years that have kind of come around and now embrace their parents' eccentricities.
Most of your books, and I've read a couple of them, starting with Porcupine in My Outhouse, I believe, but really are based on true stories.
Yes.
And it's sort of creative nonfiction.
Exactly.
How do you approach that process?
I have one mantra when I'm writing, and that's keep it fast-paced. I give up on a book myself if I'm reading something that doesn't pull me in from the start. So I keep it fast-paced, and the last 6 books that I've done with Simon & Schuster have all been true survival at sea. And you don't need to embellish because truth is stranger than fiction, some of the things that have happened.
Well, I know I read Overboard maybe 2 summers ago, I think, and it was absolutely riveting. The story of the sailboat, the captain and his mate, or his mate and the captain, and it was just, and the helicopters, it's amazing.
Right, and Overboard, the core of the story is the captain and the first mate get swept off the vessel, and the 3 rookies are on the sinking sailboat, and chapter by chapter follows those 2 groups. And in the water, it's unbelievable what the first mate goes through, and not to give the story away, but only 1 out of the 2 survives. And this was through extensive interviews with that survivor.
And I believe one of the crew left in the sailboat was from New Hampshire, is that right?
Yes, Ron Bird is from Dover, New Hampshire. And
so I mean, it's a story that really hits home. And the helicopters that rescued them, did they come into the Cape?
They landed at the Cape. They were coming from Elizabeth City. The accident occurred when the sailboat was traveling from Connecticut to Bermuda, and about halfway off the Carolinas is where the accident and overboard occurred.
Well, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
And Rose, I'm going to send it back to you.
Togus is author and co-author to 23 books, including A Storm Too Soon, Fatal Forecast, and My Outhouse, The Vermont Misadventures of a Mountain Man Wannabe. On Monday, we'll continue with this discussion about his writing and the stories he chooses. Welcome back to YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. Now, Matt McDonald will have a look at our weather for the next few days and then move on to high school sports.
Thanks, Rose. Tonight we have an 80% chance of precipitation with a possible thunderstorm before 9 p.m. We'll experience some patchy fog around 3 a.m. and lows will be in the 50s. Tomorrow we'll have fog before 10 a.m. with cloudy skies and a 40% chance of rain before noon. Highs will be in the mid-70s with skies gradually clearing in the afternoon. Winds will be between 5 and 10 miles per hour. Tomorrow night will be mostly clear with a low of 50 degrees and winds up to 10 miles per hour. Sunday we'll have sunny skies with a high of 75 and winds between 5 and 10 miles per hour. Sunday night will be mostly clear with lows in the 50s. On our northeastern map, you can see the growing storms that are expected to last until Saturday afternoon. Thunderstorms are possible from these storm formations. As we pull back to our national map, we can see a clear area in the Ohio Valley. We are expecting to be in the clear on Sunday and Monday and then return to storms, which are currently brewing out west. Now let's see what's coming up on our community calendar. Tomorrow morning, the Cornish, New Hampshire, and Norwich, Vermont farmers markets will be held at 9 a.m. In Woodstock, Vermont, the farmers market will be held at 9:30 a.m. Saturday night, the Carter Glass Band will perform at the Claremont Opera House at 7 p.m. Remember, you can submit local events from your community by sending them to news@ycnnow.com. And now let's turn to local high school sports. There is a big game happening tomorrow in baseball. The number 2 Sunapee Lakers made it to the Division IV Finals and are set to face number 8 Gorham. The game will take place at the New Hampshire Fisher Cats Northeast Delta Dental Stadium at 1 p.m. Be sure to buy tickets and support your local team. Speaking of the Fisher Cats, the team is participating in a 3-game series with Richmond. All 3 games are away games. Tonight's game starts at 7:05 p.m. Tomorrow's is at 6:05 p.m. and Sunday's is at 1:35 p.m.